Hello, welcome back to Boxroom Books and this video on Mary and the Rabbit Dream by Noemi Kiss-Deaki. I hope I'm saying that right. So this was her debut. It's an absolutely astounding debut novel, and such an achievement that she got it out on Gallibegger as well. This came out on Gallibegger Press in 2024, I believe I'm right in saying. Let's just double check that. Yeah, 2024 it came out. So if you like the Hartlepool Monkey, if you like that, if you enjoyed that historical fiction novel, or A Little Trickerie, Rosanna Pike's A Little Trickerie, if you like those kind of where it's historical fiction and it's based on a sort of story that has taken on legendary or mythological meaning and significance. So this book, the Mary in question, the titular Mary or eponymous Mary, refers to Mary Toft, who was a real woman who lived in Godalming in the 1700s. Godalming is in Surrey, which is down at the bottom of the UK. And so the story goes that there was this woman who gave birth to rabbits, and she was known as, sort of in the history books, she was known as the Imposteress Rabbit Breeder, Mary from Godalming, or Mary Toft, to give her a full name. So obviously sounds like a fantastical, mythological, myths. We're in myths and legends kind of territory. Clearly here, a woman cannot give birth to a rabbit, obviously. So I was instantly fascinated by this when I found out the premise, and this was this myth, legend, whatever, from Godalming. I'd never come across it before, maybe because I'm not from that part of the country. I don't know. I did feel a little bit ignorant that I'd not come across it, because when I started to research on the internet, there is quite a lot of stuff out there about it. Emma Donoghue has written a short story based on this character, Mary Toft. And there is another novel as well that I found as well, that I saw on Amazon. So yeah, and you can find lots of sort of, the BBC, I think, did a piece on it at one point. Lots of, non-fiction writings about this this story as well, this historical story. So what I love about this is that Noemi Kiss-Deaki has resisted the temptation, because I think there's an awful lot now of, and if you look at sort of agents and publishers and what they're after, their manuscript wish list and what they want in terms of historical fiction, a lot of the time they will say they like retellings. They like the idea of taking a historical figure and giving them a voice and, telling the story from their perspective. So giving them agency, giving them, some power kind of thing. And making it, a sort of feminist sort of piece. And that's not to say this is not feminist, but the writer does resist doing anything like that. So this is not her story told from her point of view or anything like that. It is she very much does not have agency. And I think that kind of is the point, because I think what this novel achieves in a really powerful and impactful way is it really gives you the sense of how powerless women like Mary Toft were in that time period in the 1700s, particularly if they were from a very poor background. So if they're on the bottom rung of society, then women in that class would have been at the very, very bottom in terms of the power hierarchy. And then another thing that I really like is, if I just hold that up, you can perhaps see what I mean by this, is just the sparseness of the language. So there are just sections like this where it is just written in these kind of short, simple sentences and very short paragraphs, which I think just kind of gives it a sense of matter of factness. The way that this story is told, as horrific as it is, of an ordeal of what Mary Toft went through. And believe me, it is horrific what she is put through at the hands of various men and women. because it's told in such a matter-of-fact way, it just hits home so much harder. And that was the way things were in the early 1700s. People weren't sympathetic, and people weren't, they weren't in touch with their emotions and all of this kind of thing. So it is just told in this just very stripped back, raw kind of very simplistic way. A lot of the time, not all of the time, a lot of the time, which I think, just hits it home a bit more and gives it more impact. And then I think when she does use, a metaphor or create some imagery, like, for instance, one of the characters, Sir Richard Manningham, who is one of the most powerful men in the story, she goes into a lot of detail of his shoes and describing his shoes, and that takes on kind of really symbolic meaning kind of thing. So when she does something like that, it really stands out, do you know what I mean? Because you have also got it contrasts with these very, very sparse, pared back, kind of passages. I'll do a bit of a spoiler here. So, if you want to come to this fresh, like I kind of read it without really knowing anything about it. And I think that was maybe a good way to read it. But, so if you want to do that, I am going to do a spoiler now. So for the setup, how this comes about, that sort of polite society and powerful people are tricked into believing that for a short period of time that this woman could give birth to rabbits and was giving birth to rabbits, is that it starts with poor old Mary has a miscarriage, and her mother-in-law gets this idea that in her fragile, post-pregnant state, that they could pull off this trick with the rabbits. It's her mother-in-law's kind of, brainchild, if you like. She comes up with the plot, and then she just kind of uses Mary to carry it out. And she's wanting to kind of make put some kind of dent in this power system, this power structure kind of thing. And she sees this as being a way of doing it. But she also knows that there is no way that they could do this and pull this off without getting men on side. And they've got to get men of science. They've got to get doctors and men of science on side in order to be able to pull this off. And so they recruit, first of all, a doctor from Godalming called Dr. Howard. And so there's a really clever thing that she does when she introduces this Dr. Howard. And this is something that I really like about all the men, well, not all of them, but all the really powerful ones that play a really key part and key role in convincing people that, this is happening, that there's a woman that's giving birth to rabbits. She gives them these backstories, and she does say, she goes into a bit of detail in the back about her research and about her methodology, I suppose, in terms of her approach to writing historical fiction. And she does say that she has taken quite a bit of artistic license, which I think is absolutely fine. So she does give these men sort of backstories that helps to kind of explain that there isn't just this, that there's different power structures at play here. So you've got poor old Mary right on the bottom rung, young woman who is married to Joshua and lives with Joshua's mother, who is Anne Toft, who very much rules the roost, in this household. So she is, exploited by her mother-in-law to begin with. But then you get the men coming into it. But then there's another kind of thing, that really interesting thing that she does, is where she has this power play between the men as well, where they are all kind of vying for power. And some of them, they've all got their own agendas of why they, want to be involved with this. They all obviously want to take credit for it in one way or another. So some of them want to take credit for it in terms of it being true and trying to obviously create this whole kind of illusion that it is true. But others are wanting to, kind of smash the illusion and wanting to expose the truth. So you've got this, you've got all of these different, kind of power plays going on. And I just think that's really interesting, the way that she manages to kind of, do all of that sort of thing is a really kind of strength of the book, I think. One of the things I really loved about it. I'll read you a bit of a passage here, and this is kind of right at the beginning, where Anne Toft gets the idea, and then they try to bring in this first doctor, and it sort of sets up the whole thing of how they manage to kind of bring him in and kind of recruit him. And then also it's sort of showing, though, how they think they're in charge at this point, but they absolutely aren't. So the women around Mary Toft don't know the esteemed doctor, so this is Dr. John Howard he's called, has thoughts like these from time to time. They only know he is an esteemed doctor in the town of Guildford, a town where almost only wealthy people live, and he is the only esteemed doctor that they know of, thus making him especially important. Mr. John Howard, being the only esteemed doctor the women around Mary Toft have heard of or know of, gives him unfair advantage. They don't know Mr. Howard has bouts of melancholy. They don't know that he sometimes wonders if there's really more to life. They don't know he has a pale fire in his soul that longs to grow strong, mighty and hot and to be noticed. They don't know all this. So they don't know Mr. Howard is the perfect accomplice, and they don't know Mr. Howard will soon take matters into his own hands. They don't know he soon will upend the grand plan and take it in another direction altogether, a direction to suit his own grand plans. They don't know all this. Look how many times she says there, they don't know, they don't know, they don't know. And this is very much the crux of it. This is setting it up. And from here on out, as soon as they get him involved, you know, they've got no chance. You know, it's going to be in the hands of the men, and all the men are going to have their own agendas, and they're all going to take it in their own direction, and they have absolutely no power. And the person with the least power of all is poor old Mary Toft, who's, you know, at the bottom of the very bottom rung, and is being exploited and manipulated by all of these different parties who are vying for some sort of, you know, power and their own agendas. And repetition is something that she does a lot. It's a technique that is used a lot through the book to show how Mary was repeatedly abused by the women around her, first of all, and then the men around her. And it goes from being, yeah, you know, the women who I guess you could say have the most genuine cause to be, you know, trying to pull off this stunt, I guess, if you look at it from a sense of, you know, how powerful they are, how powerless they are. But yeah, she uses repetition, I think, to show how, you know, she is repeatedly abused and how it just becomes this cyclical thing. And all abuse is cyclical, isn't it? So I think that's a really clever technique that she uses. Also, yeah, so I mentioned about, you know, all of the men having their own agendas. So when they're talking about this pale fire inside of Dr. Howard, so what it is it talks about, before this passage that I just read, how he occasionally, when he gets a moment to himself, he will reflect on his life, and he just goes through these bouts of melancholy because he's asking himself, you know, is this all there is? So even though he's got this really nice, comfortable life, and he's got, you know, he's got a profession, he's got a family, he's got a nice, comfortable family home, he has a job with meaning, he has respect and all of these things. He has so many things that poor old Mary and her family don't have, and the people in her class don't have. He still is not very much is not satisfied, and he wants to be more of a somebody. He wants to be, like it says, he wants to be noticed. So that's his agenda. And each of the men that comes along has their own agenda like that. And I think that's one of the really clever things that she does, the writer, is to imagine, you know, these scenarios for these different men. And she does say, you know, that a lot of them she has just completely fabricated, and I think that is perfectly fine. Kate Atkinson, another great, obviously, female historical fiction author who I absolutely love, Kate Atkinson. I've seen her given interviews before where she talks about, you know, yes, do the research, and this is very well researched. Trust me, it is. We'll talk maybe a little bit more about that in a second. She says, yes, do the research, but then you put it away and then you write your story. And she talks about, you know, a historical work of fiction, a novel should not read like research. That's a separate thing. You know, if you want research, go and read the history books then, not a historical fiction novel. And I think Rose Tremaine, I think, says something along the lines of, for every fact that you use a made up fact kind of thing. And this does, you know, it very much does read like it is a factual account because you can tell that she has done so much research. But she also adds that kind of that layer of, you know, she's putting the context to it, and she's adding that layer of, you know, she's fabricating the backstories. While we're talking about research, so she does use the author genuine documents. She obviously has, you know, gone and found these genuine documents, or historians that have used extracts from these genuine documents, because a group of the men that are involved in the exploitation of poor old Mary Toft, they all write their own accounts of it. And they've obviously all got their own agendas and write their own accounts based on those agendas. So some of them are saying that it is, you know, a true thing that actually happened, that this woman did give birth to rabbit parts. Others of them are, you know, trying to debunk it and saying, you know, how they knew from the start it was, you know, a fabrication and whatever. So she uses bits of that, and I love that. I love the fact that she's done that. But one thing that she uses that comes from a genuine document. So at one point there was an attempt to get Mary to confess that all of it was a fabrication. And while they are sort of interrogating her, one of the powerful men, to Douglas, is trying to write down everything that everybody says. And it talks about how he can't write fast enough. So he's obviously having to, you know, use his own kind of shorthand and put in his own kind of, you know, spin on it and whatever, because he just can't keep up with the actual genuine, you know, account and what is actually unfolding in front of him. And so I think that's a really clever thing that she does there, because it's kind of like that does give her more license, I think, to go her own way with it, because even some of the actual historical documents that we have, or that the historians have of this story, are not actually factual accounts. So I think that's a really, really, really clever thing that she does. The thing I loved was the way that she interwove. There's this other story about Magdalene, I hope I'm saying this right, Magdalene de Overmont, I think it is, who so, and again, this is like sort of, if you look into if you go and do some research into this in the history books, this was at one point sort of believed. So there was a point where men of science and medical men were very much kind of, you know, thought that the whole matters of the women's bodies, and particularly of the womb and the ovaries and all of that kind of business, that there was this kind of whole mystique around it. And I suppose this goes right back to the Bible in terms of, you know, an immaculate conception. This is a bit similar to that, where there was this French woman, noble woman, whose husband is away for a prolonged period of time, and during that prolonged period of time she gives birth, and they put it down to that, you know, she loves him so much, and she thinks of him, her thoughts of him are so vivid that she manages to still consider. Now, clearly, you know, that's bonkers, but because there was this whole mythology and mysticism around, you know, women and women's bodies and women's wombs, somehow she manages to get away with that, which I thought the way that she dealt with that, the author, it's a very funny book, right? This is the weirdest thing. It's a horrific story, absolutely horrific. But there are moments of genuine humour, and it's dark humour, it's black humour. But I'll give you another bit as well that I thought was brilliant in terms of another funny bit. So there's a point where poor old Mary is taken into this bagnio, you know, like a boudoir, a brothel, I suppose, a posh brothel. And she's held there for quite a long time. Quite a big chunk of the book is she's held there, and all of these various men are brought in to interrogate her and to, you know, physically examine her and all of this stuff. And there's just a really funny bit between some of the men here. So the power play continues to unfold during Mary Toft's time at the bagnio. The power play is unworthy and ridiculous. It causes many embarrassing scenes. On one occasion, Sir Andre hides Sir Manningham's shoes while Sir Manningham takes a break from attending to Mary Toft and frequents one of the more pleasant areas of the bagnio, an area where one can have a hot bath and cool down afterwards. This is when Sir Andre sees his chance. He ignores the glimmering opportunity to catch a glance at the remarkability of Sir Manningham's body in natura and hides Sir Manningham's shoes. This is how desperate Sir Andre is. And later, while Sir Manningham searches for his shoes, Sir Andre has sole access to Mary Toft and can pretend for the shortest time that he, in fact, is the one in charge. Sir Manningham soon finds his shoes. Hierarchy is restored. So that bit I thought was, just brilliantly funny. And it's amazing how she does manage to inject, you know, humour, genuine humour into the book. But as well, what she does is she balances that. She is doing the tragicomic thing, which is so difficult to do. There are really, really poignant passages. I think it did have me in tears on a couple of occasions. You know, in poor old Mary's, you know, bleakest moments kind of thing. She doesn't pull back any, you know, she doesn't hold back any punches kind of thing. It is really quite graphic in terms of the details that she puts in it, which I think must have been quite difficult to write, I would imagine. So yeah, it does balance, but without ever becoming overly sentimental or mawkish or anything like that. I think she strikes the balance, I think, perfectly in terms of, you know, the emotional kind of clout of the novel. And there are a couple of paintings that Noemi Kiss-Deaki mentioned references, as well as referencing these historical documents. There's a couple of paintings that exist of this story, of this time. One of them is this one, which is called, it's William Hogarth, actually, that is. And, you know, I'm a big fan of William, so I'm surprised that I never come across this story before, because I'm a big fan of Hogarth. And this one is called Cuniculari, or the Wise Men of Godalming in Consultation. She also talks about a portrait, which I'll put here somewhere, a portrait of Mary that was done, which did refer to her as, I think, like the Imposteress Rabbit Breeder. And so, yeah, I liked that she referenced those paintings as well as the historical documents as well, which I had, before I saw this in the back of the book, I had gone and Googled these paintings, had a look at them for myself anyway on the internet. So, yeah, I like that she's referencing these genuine artefacts that we have from the time. If you buy the book off Galley Beggar, it comes in a lovely, comes in a beautiful envelope. It had came in a handwritten envelope, and then this was inside with the Galley Beggar stamp on it, or seal, I should say. You get a lovely, like, signed postcard with a little drawing on there from Noemi, and also you get a quote postcard as well. And this one's got a funny, Mr. Howard is beside himself. He's so beside himself. Mary and Elizabeth fear he might piss his pants or spontaneously combust at any given moment. So one of those like little moments of black humour. So yeah, highly recommend it. Like I say, if you enjoyed the Hartlepool Monkey, or if you enjoyed Rosanna Pike's A Little Trickerie, which is that is very similar to this, actually, because that is kind of a woman who was involved in this religious charade and kind of illusion, and then got herself into all kinds of trouble over that. It's quite a different book, though, I would say, in terms of that is more told from her point of view, and is more of a retelling, I would say, whereas this, like I said at the beginning of the video, you know, kind of Noemi Kiss-Deaki kind of avoids doing that, which I think is one of its strengths. I did like that she didn't do it that way, because I think that would have been a lot of women writers, particularly, I think, would have wanted to take it that way, kind of thing. But I think it packs more of a punch, I think, because she's done it the way that she has, in terms of the men being in power and poor old Mary having no power and no agency at all. One last thing before I go, actually, just to say, if you read this and you like this, you can read the first chapter on Galley Beggar Press's website. That's what I did. I read the first chapter, I was just hooked, and I was just like, I've got to buy it, I've got to read it. The other thing, though, is if you do like this, if you like Noemi's writing, check out her on her Substack. She shares a lot of she shares novels on there, which she kind of does in kind of chapter by chapter. And she shared other short stories on there as well. And yeah, she writes a good Substack as well. So I would, yeah, highly recommend following her, subscribing to her Substack, and checking out her other stuff on there as well. Highly recommend. At some point, I will do my favourite historical fiction novels. I'll do like maybe my top 5 or something, but that's it for this one. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep reading, and take care. I'll see you next time.